because you have made my time here this week so very comfortable, and it's been a real delight of mine to get to know some of you for the first time and others of you to know a little bit better. I've enjoyed the couple of nights that we were able to go out after the evening service and speak one-on-one with several of you, and it's been an enlightening time for me and also a time of spiritual encouragement to my own heart. Look out across this congregation after having stood in front of you for the last several days, as well as mingled among you out on the campus, and I think you guys are fantastic. You are a great group of young people, and I really mean that. I thank God for every one of you, and each one of you who demonstrate a desire to do what's right, every one of you that demonstrates a desire to follow God. I thank God for you. Sitting in front of me this morning lies all the potential that is needed to change this world. I believe that. And as you continue to let God mold you and fill you and use you and empower you, you're going to find that God has great things in store for you. God does have a plan for your life. I thank Brother Cravens, Pastor Cravens, and Dr. Avery, and whoever else may have been involved in the decision to invite me to camp or to revival this year. Thank you for the wonderful room, accommodations, and everything, and everyone has been so nice. We really appreciate being back home and receiving such a warm welcome. I have so much respect for this school, and I have so much respect for the administration of this school. I am on board 100%. I'm a big fan. I love this place. Amen. And I think many of you do as well. I can remember sitting where you're sitting, and not all the time, but many times throughout the 6 years that I spent on this campus, sitting where you're sitting during chapel services and camp meeting services and revival services, and so many things about life that I didn't understand, and so many questions that I had about God and spiritual things and how everything is supposed to work in my life and the lives of others, and where do I fit in, and sometimes it can be overwhelming. Not only are you here to establish yourself spiritually and allow God to mold you into what He wants you to be, but you also are here to work and to study and to learn, and that involves and requires 100% of your energy. And so sometimes it can seem overwhelming, but I want to encourage you this morning that our God is a loving God. He's a patient God. He's a merciful God. He's a wise God, and He knows just how to help you. He knows how to speak to you. He knows how to lead you. He's not going to let you go astray. If you keep your heart open to Him and keep seeking Him, He will make sure you find the right way and make sure you know what you need to know. He's a God of revelation. He loves to reveal Himself. And we were talking, Brother Cravens and I, this week about how God reveals Himself. He doesn't reveal Himself to us all at once. We couldn't handle that kind of revelation, but it's a progressive revelation of who He is and what He requires. And as we walk with Him, we begin to understand more about Him. And I would just like to encourage someone here, I don't know who it is, but maybe someone who was like me, and I could have used this encouragement. Just enjoy where you are with God. If you're walking in the light, if you're in hand with Him, enjoy that relationship, enjoy that fellowship. Allow God to make you a joyful and a peace-filled person. I met my beautiful wife here in the year of our Lord 1990, and I had already been here a couple of years when she came, so I was an upperclassman when she got here, and her parents had, basically said she needed to wait around, for a while. There's no sense, getting into a dating relationship your first year. The only problem was I had been around here a couple years, and I hadn't seen a whole lot that I was impressed with, and when she came on the campus, I was immediately and suddenly impressed with her. I mean, I don't know that I believe in love at first sight, but I do believe in intense like at first sight. And, man, it was amazing. And, so I began to follow her around. And that was back in the day where you really couldn't do that at all. And but I was impressed with her, and I told one of my friends, the freshmen were having something nice in the dining hall, and I think the upperclassmen were supposed to serve or do something like that. But we were standing to the side as the freshmen filed out, and as she started coming down, the line, I told one of my friends, I said, I'm going to marry that girl. And I hardly even knew her. But I knew that was going to happen. I was just convinced that with my good looks and charm, she'd have to give in. And so we began our dating relationship here, and I thank God for His guidance and leadership in that, because it was a God thing. It was God that put that love in my heart for her. And after almost 20 years, going on 20 years of marriage, I love her more today than I ever have, more committed to her. And that began right here at God's Bible School. And I appreciate this kind of an atmosphere that makes it easy for us to find the one that God wants for us. So I'm not sure exactly why I said that, but be encouraged. I've been, for the last 6 years I've been in Mexico, and I've been preaching in Spanish, and I'll just tell you that I find it a lot easier and more fulfilling to preach in English than in Spanish. God has helped me, and I thank God for His help, but it's never an easy task for me to preach in another language. And when I was doing that, preaching in Spanish, there was a different focus. There were different things that were on my mind, different spiritual issues down there than perhaps what maybe we would face here, at least to some degree. But all that while, especially in the last couple of years, as I have begun to seek God to know better who He is, there have been different ideas and passions that have begun ruminating in my thought process and in my heart, and I haven't known exactly how to put it on paper, to express it, or to even organize the scriptures necessarily very well to be able to make it a cogent, cohesive outline and thought, to be able to express it in a way that would make sense. So for the last couple of years, some of the messages that I've preached here have been things that I really haven't been able to put down on paper, and just very recently have put them down in kind of a first draft, and I've practiced on you some of the thoughts and things that God has been dealing with me about. And this morning, it's not much different. Last night, or early this morning, midnight, and after, I was up, and God was speaking to me about what I should say this morning to you. And the last service of any meeting, for me at least, is always the hardest. Difficult to know exactly how you should end up a meeting and what you should say. But I do believe that this truth that God has been speaking to me about is a very helpful, challenging, and also, I hope, an inspiring truth to leave us here, and as we leave this place with a challenge and an inspiration to continue on in our walk with the Lord. I don't know if you've ever done this before. I'm sure you've heard or seen the people who stand in line at some entertainment venue outside a stadium or outside a theater or outside of a convention hall or whatever, waiting at the ticket box for the gate to open so that they can get the first ticket, so that they can be the first ones, because they really want to see the show, or they really want to see the game, or they really want to be a part of this event. And I've seen and read reports and had knowledge of people, not just one or two people, but many people lining up days in advance. If the box office opens at 8 o'clock on Monday, they're there on Friday after work, and they spend the weekend there. Whether it's a blizzard, rain, snow or sun, whatever it is. It really didn't matter the weather. They would dress appropriately. They'd bring a small tent if they had to. They'd wrap up. But they were so interested in taking advantage of whatever it was being offered in that place that they were willing to sacrifice a good degree of comfort, standing outside for 2 or 3 days and spending the nights there as well, waiting for that box office to open so that they could get those valuable tickets so that they could be a part of that program. Well, I think you look at people like that and we might say they're crazy for doing that. But no, those tickets were just very valuable to them. And so you could tell how valuable those tickets were by what they were willing to give up to get them. And before you criticize them too much, I wouldn't be a bit surprised that there's some of you, I don't do this, but some of you who get up early on the day after Thanksgiving at some ungodly hour, 4 o'clock in the morning or whatever it is, to go stand in front of Walmart or Target or Best Buy or whatever it might be to get the very best deals you can and to make sure you get that thing that you want before it's sold out. So it's the same principle that we're willing to give up our sleep and our comfort if something is valuable enough for us to do that. And we can see our set of values, we can see our pyramid of values by what we are willing to give up for that supremely valuable thing. I can't remember all the details to this story. I wouldn't be surprised if it's just a story, but the story goes that some man, the neighbor, let's say he's the neighbor of the preacher, and not a Christian, not a church-going man, doesn't know anything about church or anything like that. And one day he's cleaning out his attic, and among a lot of other things that he finds an old Bible and throws it away. He's not interested in that, and it didn't look like it was very valuable. But he looked at it, leafed through it before he threw it away. But one day he was talking to the preacher, and he was saying, I don't know, maybe I did the wrong thing. You've heard people say one man's junk is another man's treasure. He said, I maybe should have given that to you, but he said it was an old Bible. I don't know if I saw in there like 1500s or something like that. It was hundreds of old Bible. And he said it didn't mean anything to me. It was all written in German, and someone named Martin Luther had scribbled all over the place in there. And of course, the preacher was aghast that he would throw that away. Well, why? Because it would have been valuable to him. He would have placed extreme value on something like that, some article of church history so important, the other man didn't think it was that important. What's valuable to us? I do like the story of the little boy who had an older sister who was very sick, and she was going to die if she didn't get a kidney transplant. And they searched and searched and couldn't find anyone that would suit. There was not the right type available, and she was getting lower and lower each day. But finally they began to test members of the family, and this little boy indeed was compatible with her, and so they asked him if he would be willing to give up a kidney so that his sister could survive and could get better. And he very bravely shook his head and said, yes, I'm willing to do that. I love my sister. So the big day came, and they were laying side by side in the hospital room in the 2 beds there, and the nurses and doctors were hooking them up, and needles and tubes and everything, getting all ready for whatever would be happening next in the surgery. The little boy was laying there, stalwart, and yet you could see apprehension on his face as he lay there, his eyes perhaps blinking back a few tears and just bravely looking ahead or above at the ceiling, when finally a nurse came over close to where he could talk to her, and he said, nurse, I'd just like to know, when am I going to die? And she said, what? He said, well, when is this going to happen? When am I going When am I going to die? And she said, called him by name and said, you're not going to die. You're just giving one of your kidneys so that your sister can live. And of course, with great relief, great happiness, the little boy smiled to realize that he wasn't called on to pay the ultimate price. But what I see in that story is the little boy who saw his sister as valuable enough that he was willing to do so. He was willing to give up his life. He had counted the cost. Several years ago, when my youngest son went through about a year, maybe a year and a half of some very scary times physically. We had been on the mission field for just a short time, and Logan developed an issue with his eye. You all have heard the story. I won't go into all the details except to say that it was a time in our lives that we did not understand. We couldn't understand, God, you've called us to the mission field, and now we can't even do what you've asked us to do because our son is so sick and has to be in the hospital for weeks at a time and has to be having treatment 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for months, and there's no way we can even really leave him for a good part of the time. And I remember during those days, those dark days, when the doctors were trying to figure out what was wrong, and they would go in and perform surgery after surgery, and they'd do an MRI and a CAT scan trying to figure out what was wrong. And never forget how things were looking better for a time, and we were allowed to go home. We went home for Christmas, and we came back and went to the doctor, and something had happened, and it was much worse. And he said, we have to get Logan in for surgery as soon as possible. I can remember the tears streaming down his face and holding on to my neck and saying, Daddy, please don't let them take me to surgery again. Please, I don't want to do this anymore. And how my heart broke for him. And if I could have, I would have quickly and readily taken his place. I remember many times saying, Lord, please let me take his place. I don't want him to have to suffer. Remember the times they would stick him and try to find a vein, and they couldn't find it, and he would be in agonizing pain and screaming and crying. And I remember coming to the end of my rope, and I remember that dark night when he was getting ready to be released from the hospital, not because he was better, but because they had done all they could, and now they were going to have to go to the next level of treatment. And all the doctors that were working with him came in, and they said, we've done everything we know to do, and you need to be thinking about the possibility that this might be cancer. This looks like maybe a tumor of some kind, and it's certainly not responding to our treatment, and so you need to be thinking this direction. We left the hospital that night so burdened, and everything seemed so dark, and we couldn't understand why, if God has called us to do this, if God has called us, Lord, I know you called me to go to Mexico. I know you called me to be a missionary. I know what you want me to do. Why are you allowing this in my life? Why are you allowing this in the life of my family? Why does my little boy have to suffer? And I remember during those times, this verse coming to me, we are troubled on every hand, yet not distressed. We're perplexed, but not in despair. Sometimes persecuted, but not forsaken. Cast down, but not destroyed. Because even in those dark moments when I did not understand the will of God and why, if I was following Him, weren't things working out much more smoothly than they were, I knew, and I'm so glad that I knew this, and it wasn't because of anything that I have done, but because the Holy Spirit has made radical changes in my heart and life. I knew that Christ and His will was supremely valuable in my life and in the life of my wife. And what He wanted and who He was our supreme and motivating value. You know, in our culture, especially in the United States, we hear the gospel message preached like this, and this is probably a bit exaggerated, but if you come to Jesus, He'll fix all your problems. Come to Jesus, He's waiting to help you. And to a degree, that's true. He is. But maybe not the kind of help that we always think we want or need. You come to Jesus, He'll make you healthier and wealthier and wiser. He'll make things fade away that are problems to you. But it's interesting to me that when I read the New Testament, when people come to follow Jesus, we don't find Jesus with any novel church growth techniques. I don't ever hear Jesus saying, well, hey, if you follow me, listen, on Sundays or Saturdays, we'll give you a bag of candy, or we'll put on a nice program for you. I don't see that. As a matter of fact, when people came to Jesus, if I were one of His disciples, I think I'd be saying, Lord, why are you saying this? When people came to Jesus, He'd say, hey, if you want to be my disciple, if any man wants to be my disciple, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. The rich young ruler, there's an example. Man, Jesus must not have wanted him to have it easy. He must have been out to spoil his life, because the rich young ruler came to Jesus and he said, Lord, I've done all these things. And he named off all the things that he had done, all the commandments that he had kept. And you get down to the end of the rich young ruler's story there in the Bible, and Jesus says those words that I believe He's saying to people right in this auditorium this morning: one thing thou lackest. And He told that rich young ruler, go sell everything that you have, give to the poor, come follow me, and you will find treasure in heaven. You see, Jesus was offering him the supremely valuable treasure of heaven and life with Him, as opposed to earthly treasure that fades away. And the man, when faced with the option, went away sorrowful, because at the top of his pyramid of values was earthly possessions and treasures. And he walked away empty, unsatisfied, because he came to a God, he came to Jesus, and Jesus told him what it was that he needed to do to find the pearl of great price. Some people say, well, that rich young ruler story, Mark, that just proves that Jesus wouldn't ask everyone to sacrifice that. I mean, but really it proves the opposite, if I could be so bold as to suggest that. Because this story would prove to me that it is consistent with God's character to ask us for everything, to ask us to give up everything. This story would prove to me that it is certainly plausible, if not possible, that Jesus might ask us to do the very same thing. As a matter of fact, Jesus says, if any man love father and love mother and love family and brother and sister more than me, he cannot be my disciple. And he said the greatest of all commandments is that you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Then he tells the story, the parable of the man who finds the pearl of great price in a field, and he goes and sells everything that he has so that he can find that pearl so that he can have that pearl of great price. He saw something that was valuable. He saw it as valuable to him, and he saw it as valuable to others. And he bought that field with everything that he had, because he put supreme value on that pearl, on that one thing. I came to church this morning to ask you this question: how much is Jesus worth to you? I'm asking that question not just to those of you here who have been walking with Him for some time. I'm asking that question not to those of you who are born again and converted and yet still seeking God, or haven't yet yielded completely and surrendered all in total consecration to Him and allowed Him to entirely sanctify you. I'm also speaking to that person who is without God this morning, because I believe the rich young ruler was without God. I believe he was coming to Jesus to make that decision. Am I going to follow you or am I not? And so I'm talking to that person this morning as well, and I'm asking you to re-examine your pyramid of values this morning. What really is valuable to you? Paul says in Philippians chapter 4, if you'd like to turn there and read it with me, I think it's a very potent passage that needs our eyes on it. Philippians 4, Paul tells about all the things that he was and all the privileges that he had before he found Christ through verse 6 of chapter 3, Philippians 3. And then he said in verse 7, "But what things were gained to me, I counted loss for Christ." In other words, I traded those things that were valuable to me before because I have seen Christ as supremely valuable. "Yea, doubtless, and I count all things." Here we see this again, this idea of everything. "All things but loss, for the excellency of the knowledge of Christ Jesus my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things." In other words, he's not denying that there may have been some kind of value in those things. But listen to what he says. "And I do count them but dung. I count them as trash. I count them as nothing, that I may win Christ and be found in him." Verse 10, "That I may know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings, being made conformable unto his death." What had happened to Paul on the road to Damascus? He had seen the supreme value in Jesus Christ. And he had traded all of his affluence. He had traded all of his influence. He had traded all of his prestige and all of his power and everything that he had because he saw Christ as the supremely valuable thing and person in his life. It changed his life completely. It makes me wonder sometimes if some of those who have been in the church a long time and live a mediocre life at best for the Lord, it makes me wonder, just frankly, how valuable Christ is to them. I told you the story last night of Jim Elliot, missionary, martyred for the cause of Christ in Ecuador. I think I mentioned John and Betty Stam, missionaries in China. They were martyred. We could tell you those stories, and they would challenge us. But the point is that Christ was the pearl of great price to them. He was supremely valuable to them. And that meant, if necessary, they were willing to give their lives for him. What's the point you're trying to make this morning? Let me just try to boil it down to this. Following Christ comes with a cost. Yes, when we trade in the things that have been valuable to us in the past and receive what is truly valuable, that cost seems pretty minute. But for some of you this morning, especially those of you who are on the other side of the fence looking in, who haven't tasted the value and glory of Jesus Christ, you need to understand that following Christ comes with a cost. And for those of you who do know him and who have surrendered all, I need to tell you that following Christ doesn't always end well. You say, what do you mean? Well, let's look at John the Baptist. If anyone was a part of God's kingdom, if anyone was an important cog in the wheel, we would say he had a blessed ministry. God used him. And he used him to introduce and prepare the way for the Messiah, for the Son of God. I can't think of any greater prophet than John the Baptist, and Jesus couldn't either. And yet when his ministry is done, he finds himself in a dungy jail cell, and he is summarily beheaded because a young girl danced and a bitter woman wanted it that way. And that was his end. I don't know how we would do on the streets of Cincinnati telling that story and saying, follow God, it may end badly. I don't think there'd be a lot of takers. Are you trying to discourage us this morning, Brother Sankey? Absolutely not. My point is that at the point of our decision to give our lives to Christ, at the point of our decision to give everything to him, and all along our Christian journey, we are going to be faced with this one foundational truth, and that is there is a cost to serving Christ. You say, well, that's not exactly what I had in mind. I mean, my plan was to, I'd go to college maybe for a while, go to Bible college, that's all right, and maybe get a year under my belt. Then I'd like to go, get a good job, maybe get some training and get a good job, help a little at church, and retire at 65, or if President Obama has his way, 70. And then travel for a while and fade off into the sunset and die peacefully in my sleep. You know what we're doing when we think that way? We are superimposing the American dream version of Christianity on the gospel. Jesus died so I don't have to. He suffered so I don't have to. Friends, I want to encourage you with the words of Paul. His mentality was, for me to live as Christ and to die as gain. 2 Corinthians 4 provides a little look into Paul's mentality. 2 Corinthians 4, he says, verse 10, always bearing about in the body the dying of the Lord Jesus, that the life also of Jesus might be made manifest in our body. 2 Corinthians 4:10, and then skipping down to verse 16. But though our outward man perish, yet the inward man is renewed day by day. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, listen to how he says that. Our light affliction, which is but for a moment. You see, Paul's got the right perspective. It's a light affliction and it's just momentary. It's just temporary. Worketh for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. While we look not, and here's why he can have that perspective. And this is how you can have his perspective. While we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. We sung the other night, turn your eyes upon Jesus, look full in his wonderful face. Young people, I want to tell you, if we can ask the Holy Spirit, and if we'll ask him, he'll be faithful to keep our eyes centered on Jesus and keep our eyes centered on eternal values. Someone was talking to me last night, and they were relating a story to me about how a loved one had passed away, but in that process, he had brought another loved one into the family of God, and this person was saying that even though it was a tremendous loss, that they had learned to think that this was just a temporary thing, and that if that's what it took to get someone else into the kingdom, this family member into the kingdom, then it was worth it, because this man who had died could go to heaven, and then this man who had been saved through this incident could have also gone to heaven and been forgiven of his sins. And we look at people like that, and the world looks at people like that and say, how can you say that? How can you sell everything that you have and go to a Bible college? How can you just trust God to leave everything you've ever known and go somewhere and do what he wants you to do? How can you do that? The only way you can do it, and do it with joy, is when you have found Jesus to be that supremely valuable person and thing and possession in your life. Let me just read a couple verses to you out of Luke chapter 12. I want to talk, I'm laboring here for just a minute and tarrying here for just a second. We're going to move on to the conclusion of what I want to say, but I just want to help you to understand the scriptural mentality, the heart of Jesus behind this mindset that we should have. Luke 12, verses 4 through 7. And Jesus says, I say unto you, my friends, be not afraid of them that kill the body, and after that have no more that they can do. What's he saying? Don't be afraid of that. They can only kill you. Isn't that a fascinating, totally opposite mentality to what we live with? Jesus says, don't fear the person that can kill you. That's all they can do to you. Listen to what he says. For I will forewarn you whom ye shall fear. Fear him which after he hath killed hath power to cast into hell. Yea, I say unto you, fear him. And then listen to what he says. After that stark announcement of the potential cost in following him, he says, "Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 farthings, and not one of them is forgotten before God? But even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear not, therefore. Ye are of more value than many sparrows." The reason we should supremely value Jesus is because he values us. He loves us. He has our best interest in mind. And even though we may not be able to see the purpose, as we talked a little bit last night, he does. And he loves us. And we can trust our lives to him. We can trust our purposes to him. And young person, if you're here today and you haven't laid down your arms of rebellion against Jesus, you're just not sure about it. You're just not sure about what it's going to take to follow him. Can I tell you that when you finally do lay down those arms of rebellion and you finally give up the fight and you finally turn your life over to him, you will find that he has your best interest in mind, that he knows the very hairs, that he has numbered the hairs of your head, and he sees you and he cares for you. The Bible says, "For God so loved the world," and that word love is that agape idea. It's that idea that God loved and so appreciated and was in awe of creation, of us as his creation. He was so loving towards us and has expressed so much of his great grace and love for you that he sent his son. He has your best interest in mind. You can trust him. And then in Luke 14, talking about following Christ comes with a cost, I need to back that up with the words of Jesus. "For which of you," verse 28, "intending to build a tower, sitteth not down first and counteth the cost, whether he have sufficient to finish it?" In Mexico, you can drive anywhere, it doesn't matter where it is, and you'll find unfinished houses, unfinished buildings. Why? Well, because it was a good idea when it started, but they could only get that first floor or half of that first floor done. And then, well, the money ran out, so we'll just wait until more money comes in, I guess. "Lest haply after he hath laid the foundation and is not able to finish it, all that behold it begin to mock him, saying, This man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king going to make war against another king sitteth not down first and consulteth whether he be able with 10,000 to meet him that cometh against him with 20,000? Or else, while the other is yet a great way off, he sendeth an ambassage and desireth conditions of peace. So likewise," remember the rich young ruler story? "Whosoever he be of you that forsaketh not all that he hath, he cannot be my disciple." Young people, you can't be halfway in and halfway out. Pastored people like that who wanted the best of both worlds. They wanted to dabble in the world during the week and have a little bit of Jesus on Sunday. And I want to tell you what, they were almost as miserable, if not more so, than the sinners that came. At least the sinners knew which way they were going. The sinners caused less problems than they did. Following Christ means treasuring him above all. We sing the song, "Where he leads, I'll follow, follow all the way." Remember when God called me to be a missionary? I'd come through a very eventful time in my life where God had really spoken to me clearly, and I felt like at this time in my life, that time in my life, that I felt as though I was as close as I'd ever been to God at that point. I just felt like he was so close, and he was really blessing me with his presence, and I was learning new things out of his word, and I just felt an extra special sense of God's help and presence in my life. And I've been invited to preach at a camp out in Pennsylvania. Thursday night of that camp is missionary service night, and I didn't have to preach. And so the president of that camp and I were sitting, it was in a church, but we were sitting on the back pew of that church that night. He had taken us out to eat, and we got stuck in traffic, and we got in late, so we just sat on the back seat. And the missionary couple that night was talking about their mission work and what God was doing and everything. And I had been feeling for about a year or so that there was something that God had for me, and I didn't know what it was. I couldn't really get a clear signal on what God was wanting, but I had been seeking the Lord and had been open to Him. And while they were talking that night, that missionary couple, I remember I was leaning up, maybe with my elbows on my knees or maybe with my arms on the pew in front of me. I don't remember, but I was leaning in. And I'll never forget it. I'm not given to lightning bolt experiences or anything like this. When God called me to preach, it was a growing conviction, slowly built over time, and where I just grew into that realization that this is what God wanted me to do. But this was completely different. I'll never forget, in the middle of that service, a light bulb coming on in my heart and mind, and it was as clear as anything God has ever shared with me or communicated with me. I'm supposed to go to Mexico. It was just that simple. That's what God wants me to do. I prayed, Melody prayed. We both felt that was the will of God, and we went. When we first went to Mexico, the country was as we all have known it. Many parts of it, especially the coastal areas, vacation paradise. The interior of the country, mountainous with friendly people and all the traditions that we have come perhaps to understand from Mexico that are beautiful and meaningful. And it was a fairly stable country, although third world in many aspects and a lot of poverty. But it was a stable country. The new president was sworn in just a few months, maybe a year after we became missionaries, and he began to enforce his policy that was against the drug cartels in Mexico, and he began to fight them and fight them seriously. This had never happened in Mexico before. They were basically unmolested. Basically, as long as they stayed out of the way, they could, do what they needed to do. But Calderón, the president of Mexico, was convinced that they needed to go for his country to take a step up in the world economy. And so he began to fight them. At first it was local police and then federal police who began to fight the drug cartels. And then they began to find out that the drug cartels were very well armed and very well trained and not intimidated. And furthermore, they had to fight the deep, insidious corruption, because at every level of local, state, federal government, there were people who were being paid by the drug cartels to keep things a certain way. At every level of government, going up to the very highest levels of government in the government of Mexico, in the country of Mexico. A lot of corruption, a lot of people being paid off. Everyone has a price, especially when you're poor. The drug cartels would hang up signs over or on overpasses in major cities in Mexico saying, if you're in the army, you only get paid this much. If you join us, we'll pay you this much more. We'll give you a car. We'll make sure your family's provided for. And so military men and federal police began to switch sides, many of them never changing uniforms, so that they could make sure that the drug cartels were already one step ahead of law enforcement. And then the army, the Mexican army, became involved in fighting the drug traffickers and the drug cartels. You have to understand that there are many drug cartels, many drug gangs in Mexico. They are all very powerful. They are all very brutal. They have been compared to terrorists in recent years with their tactics, and they all have one thing in mind, and that's money. They want money, and unfortunately, we want the drugs. And so they risk life and limb and kill and slaughter and kidnap and everything else they do so that they can get that money. The country began to deteriorate. Over these last few years, it has deteriorated. The Mexican army has not been able to get a handle on the drug violence. It is becoming obvious that this is not going to be an easy victory. It's been 6 years now, and it has not been an easy victory. It's not been a victory. It's kind of a stalemate, which is basically a victory for the drug cartels. And then as they have gotten more desperate, as the government has been able to shut down some of their operations, and as they have been able to perhaps put a pinch on the money they've been able to make, they've taken to new measures, and that's extortion. And their modus operandi is to go to large cities, or even small villages, but go from store to store and tell the store owner, we know where you live, we know where your kids go to school, and we want this much money deposited in this account by the end of the month, each month, or you'll never see your kids again. Things like that. What I'm trying to describe for you is a country that has deteriorated so rapidly that you get the feeling when you live there that we're not really playing by any rules. It's a lawless feeling. There's not a lot of security. And in the United States, while I know we have our share of corruption, when you see a police officer, when he pulls you over, you know he's not going to want you to give him a bribe so he'll let you off, or he's not going to want to threaten you with something so you'll do something for him. You pretty well know that if he's got a uniform on, he's probably a good guy. That's not the case there. It's an unstable, deteriorating situation. You all heard the tragic story of Nancy Davis and that terrible incident, and that caused all of us in Mexico, all of us missionaries, to think twice about what we were doing and where we were and why we were there. And then the violence began to get even closer to us. Before long, there were shootouts on our street where we lived, where our kids were, and it became a very personal situation. And I can tell you the times, I can tell you that there were times when I went through scenarios in my mind, and my prayer went something like this: Lord, you lead us, you show us if we need to leave, if we need to get out, if it's something that, some situation where we shouldn't be here, we want to follow you. But Lord, at the same time, if you want us to be here, if you feel like there's still something for us to do here, if you still want us to be right here and we're in your will here, then we're willing to be here. And then there would be those scenarios that would work through my mind. Well, what if this happened? And then what if this happened? And how would it be if this happened? And you can only imagine some of the turmoil that was happening inside of me as a father and a husband wanting to care for my family. Which made the incident on October the 23rd of 2009 that much more relevant, and the violence in Mexico come home to me personally. Brother John Parker and I were on our way through the middle of Mexico on a dark rural highway. I was taking him back to a bus station so that he could take a bus to the airport in Mexico City and he could fly home. We left early in the morning and it was dark. And as we drove along, we were talking about the wonderful meeting we had had the night before with our Mexican pastors, how God had answered prayer and God seemed to be moving, and there was a good spirit of unity, and there was a good spirit of cooperation, and God was planting in their hearts a desire to reach out and plant more churches. And we were just enjoying the blessing of God and talking about how good God was. I noticed that I was in the left lane and there were some rocks. Looked like some broken concrete block in the lane, so I started to switch lanes. It was still dark, early in the morning, and I don't remember what happened next, but I will tell you the story from what I do remember and from what John told me he remembered. At that moment, a rock about this size, 1.5 pounds, came crashing through the windshield of my Toyota Sequoia and crashed into my forehead. I was probably going 65 miles an hour. And John told me later, weeks later, after I was recovered and out of the hospital and able to get back to work, he said, "Mark, you couldn't have been hit any harder than if someone would have taken a baseball bat and swung at your head as hard as they could." My skull was broken into 9 different pieces. My left eye orbit was crushed. My nose was crushed and broken. This orbit was broken. I said immediately, I can't see. I was driving. He said, "My hands fell to the seat when I was hit," and he said, "I thought you were dead. I just assumed you were instantly killed by the impact. And then you said something, and I realized you weren't dead. So I grabbed the wheel, and we kept driving down the road, him telling me, you need to brake or you need to accelerate here, whatever the case may be. and he's holding on to the wheel driving. Why we didn't stop, I'll never fully understand, except that it was the grace of God that kept us from stopping, because what we found out later was that along that section of the highway there were criminal gangs that waited with rocks, and their modus operandi was to throw rocks at passing cars. When the people would stop to check the damage, they would raid them, rob them, pillage, kill them, leave them for dead at the side of the road, and take off. Why we did not stop there is only a miracle from God. Why we didn't pull over instantly, or why I didn't jerk the wheel in the moment of impact and we crash in the median. I'll never understand those things, except that God in His mercy had His hand upon us. We drove for a mile, and John told me to slow down. He said, I'm going to pull over to the berm, and I was trying to talk with him, and he told me to quit messing with the wound in my head. He told me I'd been hit by a rock. And so, my way of thinking at that time, I was trying to get the rock out of my head. I thought it was still in there. And so I was reaching in there trying to get this rock out, and he kept saying, Mark, will you please stop? Stop doing that, buddy. You're gonna hurt yourself. Even worse. And so finally he saw these yellow construction lights on a truck. We pulled over, and they saw me in the car. My white shirt was completely saturated with blood, and they knew what had happened. They knew what we didn't know, that this was the part of the road that was dangerous. And so John didn't know any Spanish. He didn't know where he was. They just motioned to him like this, keep going, keep going. And so he helped me to get in the driver's side of the car. He got in the passenger side. He got in the driver's side and started going. About that time, my cell phone rang, and for some reason, my wife couldn't go back to sleep after I left her that morning. She should have gone back to sleep and probably would have slept for another hour or hour and a half. She couldn't go back to sleep. She just had to call. I answered my phone and said, hello? And she said, Mark, are you okay? And I said, no, talk to John. And I handed the phone to him. And you have to understand that the atmosphere in that car changed in a second. 1 minute we were rejoicing in God's blessing and in His goodness, and the next minute when I came to behind the wheel, all I could hear was John praying, and he wasn't screaming like it wasn't loud, but he was very fervently praying, saying, oh God, please, Jesus, please don't let Mark die. Please, Lord, help us, be with us. He was crying and instantly impacted in a very deep way. And I remember him saying to me on a couple of different occasions, Mark, buddy, I don't think you're going to make it. We got to get you to a hospital. And I was saying, John, let me just take you on to the bus station, and on the way back, I'll get it stitched up. I wasn't thinking exactly the way I normally would. And so Melody gets on the phone, and I hear him say, Melody, we've had a bad accident. Mark's been hit in the head. I don't know what to do. I don't know where I am. There's no lights around. And God gave my wife unbelievable sustaining grace, and she was stable, and she said, John, just drive till you find some lights, stop, knock on the door, whatever you have to do, and this show them Mark, and they'll know what to do. She told him the word that he needed to say in Spanish for help, ayúdame. And so just say that and then point to Mark, and they'll know what to do. Well, 4 or 5 miles down the road, he's driving desperately, looking for someone who can help. We find a little convenience store that's open. The lights are on, and he pulls right up almost into the front door and runs inside. And I'm in the driver's side, and I can't see, but every once in a while, if I lean my head back and lift, I could open this eye and see just a little bit out and could see John. And I remember him coming out of that store, and he was saying, pronto, pronto, pronto. He was impacted. He was afraid. And I remember he was giving me water to drink. And he said, Mark, I'm afraid you're going to choke on your blood. You're choking and you're gagging, and you've got to drink this water to help you. And they called the ambulance. And while John is waiting for the ambulance, a Mexican man in a business suit walks up to him in English, says, take your friend to CMQ Hospital. He will be fine. And he gets in his car and drives away. I've thought about that since then, and I've thought about this scripture verse. For he shall give his angels charge over thee, to keep thee in all thy ways. I don't know if that man was an angel. I'm not saying that he was, but it sure seemed like something an angel might do. The ambulance came, and the medics that were in the ambulance didn't get out of the ambulance. They sat there just looking at me with their mouths agape, not moving. And John was frustrated and he was panicking, and so he just grabbed me by the elbow and walked me over to the ambulance and opened the doors and pushed me inside. And finally, one of the medics came back to tend to me, and I remember him putting oxygen on me and asking the driver something about what he should do, and I lost consciousness and I awakened again in the emergency room. What's interesting is that in the emergency room of this hospital, which, by the way, that hospital was a top-of-the-line hospital. It was probably the best hospital in that region. We never would have found it. John didn't know where he was. I never would have been able to tell him had I known or had I been in a state where I could about that hospital. We had no idea. There was no one in the emergency room. Their full attention could be focused on me. The neurosurgeon was on his way to Mexico City to teach other surgeons to do what he does. We found out later that he had been trained in New York and St. Louis and has spent time in the United States, and that he'd been doing neurosurgery for 27 years. But at the time, we didn't know any of that. He was on his way to Mexico City. They called him and said, "You can't leave, you can't go. You have to come to the hospital." He came to the hospital. My wife, I could tell you the long story about how she found the hospital. She was by herself without any way to get anywhere with 3 kids. She found her way to the hospital. Thankfully, we were all in the same area. She wasn't far away. And she came to the hospital, and she came in and stood by my gurney there in the emergency room, and she was crying. And I said, "Melody, why are you crying?" And she said, "Well, honey, you look terrible. I said, "Honey, that's not the first time you've told me that." I said, "How are the kids?" And she said, "They're fine. We're just concerned about you. We want you to be okay." The Mexican pastors came in, and I'll never forget them praying for me, fervently praying and pleading with their God to save my life. 5.5 hours of surgery. The doctor came out and said, "It went fine." But he said, "I have to tell you, I can't promise you anything. As severe as his brain injury is, it may be years. We don't know if he'll ever walk or talk or be able to see. We don't know any of those things." He said, "We've seen injuries this severe, and people are not even as severe, and people don't walk or talk for years or maybe ever." And so I went up to my room. They took me up there, and the ophthalmologist came in and said, "Okay, we got to find out if he can see." And so he said, "I'm going to shine this light," telling my wife this. "I'm going to shine this light in his eyes. The first eye, I'm going to start on the right eye and see. And if he responds that he can see it, then we know that's good. He can see the light. He has vision." So he went over to my bed, and I'll never forget that it was hard to do, but he pulled my eyelid back and shone that bright light, and I could see it. And I made a comment to the effect that I can see that. And then he came over to this eye. This is the eye orbit that had been crushed. This was the eye that they were really extremely concerned about. And, with his fingers crossed, so to speak, he lifted up this eyelid to see, and he put that light down into my eye, and I just about came off the bed backwards like this, trying to get away from that light. "Oh, yes, I can see it. I see it." He told to my wife, "He can see it. That's good." Said, "I don't know if your husband will ever be, it might be a year or so before he's ever normal again." My wife was very happy because she'd never lived with a normal person before, and there was even a chance in a year I might be normal. That was good news to her. I say all of this, I tell you this story because they told my wife that it would be years probably, and then they saw all these people who were praying for me, and they began to revise that. People came in, the pastors came in and stood around my bedside and prayed. One Saturday morning, they tell me I was in excruciating pain. I don't remember, but I was hollering and crying out in pain. My head was hurting, and I couldn't stand it. And Melody asked the pastors to come in. There were several of them there, maybe 6 or 7, and they came in, and those pastors didn't know anything about hospital etiquette. They didn't know anything about a hospital hushed prayer, at a bedside. Those people, they began to call on God. I mean, they prayed. They raised their voices. They asked God to take away my pain. And then they filed out one by one. All but one went down to the waiting room. There was one man. His name is Kuko. This man is a godly man. He's a church planner. He's a soul winner. He loves the Lord with all of his heart. He went to plant a church in the middle of Mexico, and the people stoned him twice. But he persevered, and there's a church there today sitting high above that village, right there at the top of that village, and he's preaching Jesus Christ to that congregation every Sunday. This is the kind of man that he is. He stayed outside my room, walking back and forth, praying in the hallway. Melody came back into the room a few minutes later and said, "Mark, how's your pain?" And I just put my hand up like that and said, "No," just with this gesture, "No pain." She began to cry, and she walked out and she said, "Brother Kuko, he says he has no pain." He said, "I know." He said, "God just told me right here, the pain's gone." God was with us through each day of that cycle in our lives. And people have often asked me, and believe me, I've asked myself, why do you think that happened? I mean, why would God allow that to happen? I mean, again, Lord, we're serving you, and I know I'm in your will, and I know I'm following you here. I've followed you here. It reminds me of the story in the Gospels where Jesus told his disciples to go to the other side of the lake, and while they were on their way, they encountered that storm, and they all thought they were going to die. Jesus sent them there, knowing full well there was going to be that storm, knowing full well that he was going to be with them in that storm. I can't tell you all the reasons why. I'll never know. Maybe not until I get to heaven will I know all the purposes and reasons why God allowed that into our lives. What I will tell you is the same God that allows those circumstances into our life as followers of Christ is the same God that walks with us every step of the way, who strengthens us when we can't even imagine taking the next step, who gives us hope when we can't even see anything that's worth hoping for, who is with us in the middle of those trying times, and we can't even understand why there's joy and peace in our hearts when everything seems to be crashing in around us. Still there is God, still there is his presence, still there is his Spirit to strengthen and to guide. We were interviewed a few months ago by a TV station in South Texas. They had heard about us, and we told them about our story, and they knew about Sister Davis as well, and they also knew we were going back into Mexico after these incidences. And the camera was rolling. They were in the little trailer that we had there on a campus where we sometimes stay when we come out to Texas, and cameraman had his camera rolling, and the interviewer was asking us questions. And then he came down to the end of the interview. He'd ask us all kinds of questions, and he said, just out of curiosity, he said, why would you go back? Why would you take your family back? I mean, what are you thinking taking this kind of a risk when you know what the risk is? Melody talked to him a little bit about the fact that when we follow Jesus, our supreme value isn't on our personal safety or protection. It revolves around following him and doing his will. And I said if I was selling cars in Mexico or doing business, I wouldn't go back. But I'm doing a lot more than that. I have a call to follow, and I believe I'm supposed to go back. Unconverted people can't understand that. Let me tell you something. When you make up your mind you're going to follow Jesus, there may come times in your life when you have to face a hardship. Maybe not anything like I've faced. A lot of God's best people have never had to face those certain kinds of difficulties. But there may come a time in your life as you follow Jesus that you have to come up against a trial or a test, and you may not understand why God is allowing it into your life. It's at that point that you had better have it clear in your heart and mind who is holding the supreme value in your heart and in your life. He is supremely valuable. And I would be able to tell any interviewer, anyone who wanted to ask me why I would go back, and if I was called to go again, I would say because Jesus Christ is worth that risk. He's worth it. I came back to Saltillo after the accident, and the pastor there, he'd become a very good friend of mine. And the scar was a lot more visible then than it is now. It was very red, angry looking, and it was just very obvious. And remember one day he was visiting me in my home, and we were getting ready to leave, and as was our practice, we had prayed together, and then he was going to leave, and for some reason we were talking about the scar. Maybe he was saying that it looked better, maybe it was fading or whatever, but I remember him shaking my hand, and I'll never forget him saying, well, now, brother, you can say you have the marks of the gospel on you. And I thought about 2 Corinthians 11:25, where Paul says, thrice was I beaten. He tells about all the things he persevered and all the things he suffered through. Once I was stoned, thrice I suffered shipwreck. Night and a day I've been in the deep. Journeyings, perils of water, robbers, heathen, perils in the city, perils in the wilderness, in weariness and painfulness, in hunger and thirst, in fastings, in cold and nakedness. And then he says, if I must needs glory, I will glory of the things which concern mine infirmities. And then he says in chapter 12 and verse 10, therefore I take pleasure in infirmities and reproaches and necessities and persecutions and distresses for Christ's sake, for when I am weak, then am I strong. And I thought about that verse. I think it's in Galatians chapter 6. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, I can't find it, but it's a verse. It's a reference to one of the writings of Paul where he says, I bear in my body the marks of the Lord Jesus. You say, well, I sure hope I don't have to bear a mark like that. Well, you probably won't. I mean, the chances are very, very low that you will, but let me tell you something. If you're going to follow Christ, you will be marked. Once you make that decision, His presence in your life and the obedience that you express to Him as your supreme value will mark your life. Your life will be marked with a single-minded devotion to Him. Your life will be marked with a holiness and a Christ-likeness that you exude at all times and all places. Your life will be marked with fervent love for others and for God. Your life will be marked with wholehearted service to His kingdom. Your life will be marked. You will carry with you the marks of following Jesus. And yes, there is a cost. But I gotta tell you something, the cost of non-discipleship is so much greater than the cost of discipleship. One day, the promise is we will see Jesus in all of His glory, and it will be worth it all when we see Him. I want us to stand together this morning, and I want us to sing that chorus. How many of you, raise your hand if you know that chorus, make my life a living sacrifice, knowing it's the least that I can do. How many know that? Make my life a living sacrifice. How many? Raise your hand. Because I'm going to need all your help. There's a lot of us that don't know it. So we're going to learn it. We're going to sing it through 2 or 3 times. We're going to sing it until we are comfortable with it and we can testify by it. Let's sing that chorus together. Those of you who know it, and then as we sing it, the rest of you can join in. Let's sing.
We're glad you joined us. God's Bible School and College prepares students for lives of ministry wherever God calls them. This content is possible because of the generous support of friends like you. To support GBSC, visit giving.gbs.edu. Thank you.